What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors sits down for what should be a routine interview, only to find himself face with a host who seems determined to tear him down? What happens when professionalism meets personal agenda and decades of mutual respect crumble in real time on national television? Today, we're diving into the explosive confrontation that left Samuel L. Jackson walking off the View set and Whoopi Goldberg scrambling to save face. This is a story about power, ego, and what happens when someone pushes too far. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment because this story will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about daytime television. Samuel L. Jackson walked onto the View set that morning, expecting the usual promotional circuit routine. He had a new film to discuss, some light banter about his career, maybe a few laughs with the hosts. What he got instead was an ambush that would become one of the most talked about moments in daytime television history. The trouble started before the cameras even rolled. As Jackson settled into his chair, adjusting his signature Kangol hat, Whoopi Goldberg leaned over with what appeared to be a friendly pre-show chat. But her words carried an edge that immediately put the veteran actor on alert. "So, Samuel, I hope you're ready to have a real conversation today. Not just some fluff piece about your latest movie," Whoopi said. Her voice low enough that the studio audience couldn't hear, but loud enough for Jackson to catch every syllable. Jackson raised an eyebrow, his expression shifting from relaxed to cautious. "I'm always ready for a real conversation, Whoopi. That's never been a problem for me." "Good, because I've got some questions that might make you uncomfortable," she continued, a smile playing at her lips that didn't reach her eyes. "Hope you can handle it." The veteran actor had been in this business long enough to recognize when someone was trying to rattle him. He'd faced down directors, producers, and critics throughout his career, but this felt different. This felt personal, though he couldn't understand why. When the show went live, Whoopi's introduction seemed standard enough to the viewing audience, but Jackson could hear the subtle digs woven throughout her words. She emphasized his age, questioned whether he was still relevant in modern Hollywood, and made pointed comments about actors who refused to evolve with the times. "Today, we have Samuel L. Jackson with us," Whoopi announced to the audience. "An actor who's been around for decades now? Still making movies at 75, which is impressive, though some might wonder if it's time to pass the torch to younger talent." Jackson's jaw tightened slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Well, Whoopi, I'm still here because audiences still want to see what I bring to the screen. When they stop buying tickets, I'll stop making movies. But don't you think there's something to be said for knowing when to step aside? I mean, how many more tough guy roles can one person play?" Whoopi pressed, her tone becoming more aggressive with each word. The other hosts shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Joy Behar attempted to redirect the conversation toward Jackson's new film, but Whoopi steamrolled right over her. "I'm curious, Samuel, about this pattern in your career choices. You seem to gravitate toward roles that glorify violence, that perpetuate certain stereotypes. Don't you think as a black actor you have a responsibility to choose better material?" Jackson's eyes flashed with anger. "Excuse me? Are you seriously questioning my choice of roles and suggesting I'm somehow betraying my race?" "That I'm not suggesting anything. I'm asking directly. When young black men see you on screen, what message do you think you're sending them?" The studio fell silent. Even the audience seemed to sense that something was going very wrong very quickly. Jackson leaned forward in his chair, his voice dropping to the dangerous, quiet tone that anyone who knew him recognized as a warning sign. "Let me get this straight, Whoopi. You're sitting here on national television questioning my integrity as both an actor and as a black man in America. You're suggesting that I've spent 4 decades in this business making poor choices that somehow harm my community. I'm asking legitimate questions that I think viewers deserve answers to." Whoopi shot back, her voice rising. "You've made millions playing characters that what?" Jackson interrupted, his composure finally cracking. "That entertain people, that tell stories, that showcase the range and depth of black talent in Hollywood. You want to talk about responsibility? Where was this concern when you were making Sister Act 2, or when you were hosting Comic Relief?" Whoopi's face flushed red. Don't you dare turn this around on me. We're here to talk about your choices, your career, your impact. My impact. Jackson stood up, his full height imposing even in the seated talk show format. My impact has been 40 years of breaking barriers, of showing that a black actor can carry action films, dramas, comedies, everything in between. My impact has been proving that talent transcends stereotypes, something you seem to have forgotten. The tension in the studio was palpable. Cameras continued rolling, capturing every heated exchange. The other hosts looked like they wanted to disappear into their chairs. You don't get to lecture me about my career or my choices, Jackson continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. You don't get to sit there and question my commitment to my community when you know nothing about what I've done behind the scenes, the doors I've opened, the young actors I've mentored. Whoopi wasn't backing down. I know what I see on screen, and what I see is someone who's comfortable playing into Hollywood's worst impulses about black men. And what I see, Jackson replied, his voice now filled with barely controlled fury, is someone who's forgotten where she came from. Someone who's become so comfortable in her position that she thinks she can tear down other black actors to make herself feel more important. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Whoopi's mouth fell open, clearly not expecting Jackson to fight back with such force. She had pushed him, expecting him to back down or deflect, but instead she had awakened something fierce and uncompromising. How dare you question my commitment to my community? Whoopi sputtered, her carefully constructed television persona beginning to crack. I've been fighting for representation and equality in this business since before.
At a bar in Columbus, Ohio,
Jackson
two
cut her
teachers
off
on their
again.
lunch break
Since
sat in
before
stunned
I was doing the
silence,
same thing.
watching it play out
Since
on a
before
muted
I was
TV.
taking roles
One of
that
them,
other
Janice,
actors were
mouthed the
afraid to
words.
take
Did he
because
really
they were
just
too
say that?
challenging,
Her
too
friend
complex,
nodded,
too
eyes
real.
still fixed on the
You
screen.
want to talk about
She
fighting
handled it
for
like a sniper.
representation?
In a
I've
college
been that
dorm in Tempe,
representation for
a
decades.
political science major
The
named
studio
Malik
audience
Thomas
was
opened his
completely
laptop
silent now,
and started a
sensing
thread
they were
titled,
witnessing
"Why This
something
Crockett Moment
unprecedented.
Matters More Than You
This
Think."
wasn't the usual
By the next
lighthearted
morning,
celebrity
it had
interview
over
or
90,000
even
shares.
a heated political debate.
Meanwhile, inside
This
the
was
Capitol,
personal,
journalists
raw,
hovered
and
outside
getting
the
more
chamber
intense
waiting
by
for
the
the
minute.
hearing to adjourn.
Joy Behar
Everyone
made
was trying
another
to
attempt
position
to
themselves near
intervene.
Crockett,
Maybe we
but
should
her
take a
team had
commercial
already
break.
locked things down.
And no,
She wouldn't be
Jackson
giving a
said
statement.
firmly, his
Yet.
attention
Not
never
today.
wavering from Whoopi.
She walked out
I want
quietly,
to
flanked
finish
by her
this
aides,
conversation.
avoiding eye contact
I want to
with the
understand why
cameras.
someone I've known
Someone
and
tried to shout a
respected for
question,
years
but she
decided to
didn't stop.
ambush me on
Her body
national
language said it
television
all.
with
She wasn't
accusations
looking to
about
go
my
viral.
character and
She
my
was doing her
commitment to
job.
my people.
Later that
Whoopi's
evening,
hands
her
were shaking
communications
slightly,
director,
but
Kiara
whether from
Owens,
anger or
opened her
nerves
phone
was
and nearly
impossible to
dropped
tell.
it. Over
I'm not
2 million
ambushing
views
anyone.
in under 4
I'm
hours.
asking the hard
Hashtags
questions that
trending.
need to be asked.
Celebrities
Hard
quoting
questions?
her line.
Jackson
Civil rights
laughed,
leaders
but there
calling
was
for
no
interviews.
humor in it.
She turned
Hard
to Crockett,
questions would
who
be
was
about
quietly
the craft,
finishing up a
about the
folder of
industry,
documents at her
about the
desk.
challenges
You know
we
they're calling
face
this
as
the line of
artists.
the decade, right?
What you're doing is
Kiara
character
asked.
assassination
Crockett didn't look
disguised as
They
journalism.
can call it what they want.
The words
I
character
call it Tuesday.
assassination hung
But while
in
Crockett
the air
was staying
like
focused,
smoke from a
the
gunshot.
rest of the country was
Whoopi's
just starting
face
to
contorted
react,
with rage.
and the
Her
conversation was
carefully
about to
maintained
explode.
television
Before she was
composure
Congresswoman
completely
Crocker,
shattered.
before the
She leaned
cameras,
forward aggressively,
before the names started
pointing her
trending
finger
every 6
directly
hours.
at Jackson.
She was just
Don't
Jasmine,
you sit there
raised
and
in
act
St.
like you're
Louis,
some kind of
Missouri.
victim?
Her mother
She
worked
spat.
nights at
You've
a
made a
health
career
clinic.
out of
Her
playing
father was
the
a
angry
school
black
bus
man.
driver who
And
never
now you
missed a
want to get
day
upset
behind the wheel.
when someone calls you out
Jasmine
on
grew
it.
up in a house where you didn't
Jackson's
speak
eyes narrowed
unless you had something
dangerously.
worth saying.
Called out.
And when you did,
By
you
who?
better say it like you
By
meant
someone
it.
who thinks
She
she's
wasn't the
appointed
loudest
herself
in
the
school,
moral
but
authority
she always
over
had this
black
way of making
actors in
teachers
Hollywood.
pause.
Who gave
Her
you that
classmates
power?
joked that
Whoopi.
Jasmine didn't argue.
Axe.
She
Nobody
cross-examined.
gave it to me.
At 16,
I earned it.
she was already
I've been in
volunteering
this
at
business,
municipal court
fighting
proceedings,
battles while
just
you
to
were
sit
still
and
doing
listen.
theater in New
Not
York,
for credit,
thinking you
not
were
even
better
for
than
school.
everyone else.
She just liked the way
personal
truth
nature
sounded
of
when
the
it had no
attack
place to
was
hide.
unmistakable.
Her path to
Now, this
politics
wasn't about
started
his
in a
recent
courtroom in
film
Texarkana,
or even his
Texas.
career choices.
Fresh out of law
This
school,
was about something
she took on a
deeper,
case no one else
something
wanted.
that had been festering
A young man
between them
wrongfully
for
arrested,
years.
held for
So
3
that's what
days,
this is
no
really
charges.
about, Jackson
He didn't
said,
have money for a
his
lawyer.
voice dropping
The city
to
just
that
wanted it
dangerous
gone.
whisper again.
But Crockett didn't
This
take
isn't
the
about
easy
my
route.
roles or
She
my
stayed up for
impact on
2
the
nights
community.
pulling records,
This is
finding
about
contradictions
your
in
ego.
officer
This
reports,
is about you feeling threatened
interviewing
by
witnesses
someone
that
who
had been
never
ignored.
bought into your
When
version
she walked into that
of how
courtroom
black
and laid it
actors
all out,
should behave
the
in
judge
Hollywood.
stopped her midway through
Whoopi
opening
shot up from her
statements and
chair,
said,
her
"Miss
voice
Crocker,
rising to
you
match
sure you're
her
fresh out of
elevated
school?"
position.
She
Threatened
smiled.
by you.
Only on
Please.
paper.
I've
She
won
won
an
the
Oscar,
case in
an
less than
Emmy,
an hour.
a Grammy,
Word
and
got
a Tony.
around. That's
What
how she
exactly
moved.
would I be
Quiet
threatened
wins
by?
with loud meaning.
The fact that I
Over the
never
next
needed
5
your
years,
approval.
she became the
Jackson
person
replied
families called
calmly,
when everything else
remaining
had
seated,
failed.
but
Police
somehow
misconduct,
still
land
commanding the
disputes,
space.
eviction
The
battles.
fact that I built
She
my
took cases
career
for free when
without
she had
kissing
to,
the right
and
rings
made her
or
living off
playing
the
the
ones she
politics
could
you
bill.
seem to think
By
are
the
so
time she ran for
important.
state
The
legislature,
fact that after
she
40
wasn't
years,
just known.
I'm still
She was
here,
trusted.
still working,
She didn't speak
still
like a
relevant
politician.
without having to tear
She
down
spoke like
other
someone who
actors
had sat
to
at
make
the kitchen
myself
tables
feel
of people
important.
who don't have
The
lobbyists.
studio was dead silent,
That mattered.
except for
When
the
she
hum
won
of
her
the
seat
cameras.
in the Texas House,
Even the technical
they
crew
told her
had
to keep
stopped
her head
moving,
down. Learn the
transfixed
game.
by the verbal
Play it
warfare
safe.
unfolding
She did the
before them.
opposite.
The
In
other
her
hosts
first year,
looked like
she authored a
hostages
bill
in
pushing
their own
back
show.
on aggressive
You
policing
think you're
tactics
so much
during
better than
protests.
everyone else.
It didn't
Whoopi
pass, but the
continued,
hearings drew
her
national
voice
attention.
cracking with
That
emotion.
was the first time
Walking
C-SPAN
around
viewers saw her in
Hollywood
action.
like you're untouchable,
Voice calm,
like your
hair pulled
reputation
back,
is so
surrounded by
pristine
men
that
twice her
nobody can
age who
question
couldn't
you.
get her to back
My
down.
reputation speaks
Back in
for
Washington,
itself.
some party
Jackson
leaders
shot
started
back.
watching her
I
clips
don't
on
need to
mute,
attack other
just to
people
study
to
her
build
body
it up.
language.
I don't need
She
to
didn't
use my
blink much,
platform to tear
didn't
down
fidget,
fellow actors
never
who've
smiled
done
unless she
nothing
meant it.
but show me
When
respect
she eventually
for
ran
decades.
for Congress,
Respect?
it wasn't about ambition.
Whoopi laughed
It
bitterly.
was about scale.
You call it respect
She wanted a
when
bigger
you
table
ignore
because
people.
she was tired of
when
trying
you
to
act
shout
like
from
you're
the
too
hallway.
good to
And when
engage
she won her
with your
seat,
peers.
she sent her mother
When
a
you
note.
treat award
It
shows
read,
and industry
"You told me
events
to make my
like
voice
they're
matter.
beneath you.
I found a bigger
Jackson
mic."
finally stood up.
So when Trump told
his
her
full
to sit down,
presence
girl,
filling the
in
space
front of the
between them.
world, she
I
wasn't
call it
shocked.
maintaining my dignity.
She'd heard worse
I call
from
it
judges,
not getting
from
caught
police
up
chiefs,
in the petty
from wealthy
politics
developers
and
who thought she was the
backstabbing that you
assistant.
seem to thrive on.
But she also knew
If that
something
makes
else.
me seem aloof
Millions
to you,
of people were
then
watching.
so be it.
Now,
Petty politics?
girls who looked like
Whoopi's
her,
voice
women who
reached
had
a
been
fevered
dismissed
pitch.
with the same
Is that
kind
what
of
you
lazy
call
disrespect
advocating
for
for better
decades.
representation?
She didn't need to
Is that
scream.
what you call
She
fighting
didn't
for
need to throw her
opportunities
papers
for
or
other
storm
black
out.
actors?
She just needed
No,
to
I
do what
call
she
that
always
Tuesday.
did.
Jackson
Cut to the
replied
truth
coldly.
and let it stand
The
on
difference
its own.
is I do
And that's
it
why the
without
clip hit
making
so
a
hard.
spectacle of myself.
It wasn't just a viral moment.
I do it without
It was a
needing credit
culmination,
or recognition.
a story that
I
began
do it
in
because
courtrooms,
it's the
city
right thing to
halls,
do,
and long
not
nights
because it
staring
makes
at
me look good on
spreadsheets,
television.
trying to keep someone
The
from losing their
accusation
home.
hit Whoopi
Now, all that
like a
history
physical
had met a
blow.
platform
Her
too
mouth
big to
opened
ignore.
and closed
But
several
the cameras
times
only caught the
before she could
exchange.
find her voice again.
What they missed was
You
what happened behind
sanctimonious,
closed
arrogant,
doors.
careful.
Once the
Jackson
hearing
warned,
ended,
his
the
voice
hearing
cutting
adjourned
through
just
her
after
rising
5:30
hysteria.
p.m.
You're on
The real
national
noise started.
television.
As
Whatever
soon as
you
the
say
cameras
next
stopped
is going
rolling,
to follow you
inside the
for the
committee
rest of
room,
your career.
aides scrambled to
But
pack up
Whoopi was
files while
beyond
reporters
caring
tried to
about
snag
consequences
off-the-record
now.
comments from members
Years of
slipping toward
resentment,
side
jealousy,
exits.
and
Security
frustration
escorted
were
Trump out a
pouring out of
separate
her
door,
like water
shielded
from a
from the
broken
growing
dam.
crowd of
You
journalists
think you're
now
so
planted
perfect,
just
so
outside the
above it
Capitol
all.
steps.
But I know the
Behind the
truth about
dais,
you, Samuel.
Jasmine Crocker
I
quietly
know about the
gathered her
tantrums
papers.
on set, the
Not
directors
rushing,
you've
not
clashed
dragging
with,
her feet
the
either.
co-stars
A junior
who can't
staffer
stand
handed
working
her
with
a
you.
bottle of water
Jackson's
without saying a
expression
word.
didn't change.
She took it,
but
nodded
something
slightly,
shifted
and
in
moved
his
toward
demeanor.
the hallway.
His voice
She hadn't
became
said anything
even
about
quieter,
the moment.
more controlled.
Yet.
Is that
Not to
right?
anyone.
And where
But
exactly
everyone
did
around
you
her was
hear
talking.
these stories, Whoopi? From the same people who've been feeding you information to use against me in this interview. The question caught her off guard. Her eyes flickered with something that might have been panic. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. This whole performance, this orchestrated attack, it didn't come out of nowhere. Someone's been whispering in your ear, filling your head with gossip and half-truths, encouraging you to go after me. The question is, why are you letting them use you? Whoopi's face went pale. Nobody's using me. These are my questions. My concerns. Your concerns? Jackson laughed. But it was a sound devoid of any warmth. You've had these concerns for how long exactly? Because we've been at the same parties, the same industry events for years, and this is the first I'm hearing about them. Funny. How these concerns only surface when there are cameras rolling and an audience watching. The other hosts were looking back and forth between them like spectators at a tennis match. But this was no game. This was a public dismantling happening in real time. I've always had these concerns, Whoopi insisted, but her voice lacked the conviction it had carried earlier. I just never had the platform to address them directly. Never had the platform. Jackson's eyebrows shot up. You've been hosting this show for years. You've had a platform every single day, but you chose today, when I'm here to promote my new film, to turn this into your personal vendetta. Why today, Whoopi? What's really going on here? Sarah Haynes finally found her voice. Maybe we should really take that commercial break now. No, Jackson said firmly, never taking his eyes off Whoopi. I want an answer. I want to know why someone I've known for years, someone I've always treated with respect, decided to use her television television show to publicly attack my character and my career. Whoopi was breathing heavily now, her chest rising and falling with the effort of maintaining her composure. You want to know why? Because I'm tired of watching you coast on your reputation while other actors, better actors, get overlooked. I'm tired of watching Hollywood hand you roles that could go to younger, hungrier talent. Younger talent like who? Jackson asked. Name them. Tell me which specific actors you think deserve my roles, and explain to me why they're more qualified than I am. The challenge hung in the air. Whoopi opened her mouth, but no words came out. She hadn't expected to be pressed for specifics, hadn't prepared for Jackson to call her bluff so directly. That's what I thought, Jackson said quietly. This isn't about other actors. This isn't about representation or opportunity or any of the noble causes you're trying to hide behind. This is about you and whatever personal issue you have with me. I don't have a personal issue with you, Whoopi protested. But her voice was weak now, the fight going out of her. Then explain this. Jackson gestured around the studio. Explain why you ambushed me on national television. Explain why you've spent the last 20 minutes trying to tear down my career and questioning my integrity. If this isn't personal, then what is it? Whoopi looked around the studio as if seeing it for the first time. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every moment of her meltdown. The audience was staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to disappointment. Her co-hosts were looking anywhere but at her. She had painted herself into a corner with no graceful way out. I just think, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I just think that actors in your position have a responsibility to use their influence more wisely. And you appointed yourself the judge of how wisely I use my influence. Jackson asked, based on what qualifications? Based on what authority? Who are you to sit in judgment of my career or my choices? The questions kept coming, each one landing like a hammer blow. Whoopi had started this fight expecting to dominate, to expose what she saw as Jackson's flaws and hypocrisies. Instead, she found herself being systematically dismantled by someone who had decades more experience dealing with hostile interviews and personal attacks. Whoopi's silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. The weight of Jackson's questions hung over the studio like a storm cloud, and everyone could feel the electricity in the air. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, smaller, but somehow more venomous. You know what your problem is, Samuel? You think you're untouchable. You think because you've been successful, because you've made money, that puts you above criticism. Jackson shook his head slowly. No, Whoopi. I think criticism should be fair, honest, and based on facts, not personal grudges dressed up as journalism. What you've done here today isn't criticism. It's a hit job. A hit job? Whoopi's voice cracked as she tried to regain her footing. I'm asking legitimate questions about your career choices, about the messages you send through your work. Legitimate questions. Jackson's voice rose for the first time, his composure finally showing cracks. You started this interview by questioning whether I'm too old to be acting. You've attacked my choice of roles, questioned my commitment to my community, and suggested that I'm somehow harmful to young black men. And you call that legitimate? The studio audience began to murmur among themselves. Some were shaking their heads in disapproval, clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Others were leaning forward, unable to look away from the train wreck unfolding before them. I call a holding you accountable, Whoopi shot back, but her words rang hollow now. Accountable to who? To you. Jackson laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the studio. I'm accountable to my family, to my craft, to the audiences who pay to see my work, and to myself. I'm not accountable to someone who's decided to make me the target of her personal frustrations. Sunani, host, finally attempted to intervene. Maybe we can redirect this conversation toward something more positive. No, Jackson said firmly, holding up his hand. I want to finish this. I want everyone watching to understand what really happened here today. He turned back to Whoopi, his eyes blazing with controlled fury. You had an agenda coming into this interview. You didn't invite me here to talk about my new film or my career. You invited me here to tear me down, and you thought I would just sit here and take it. I invited you here to have an honest conversation, Whoopi insisted. But her voice was shaking now. Honest. Jackson's voice dropped to that dangerous whisper again. There's been nothing honest about this from the moment I sat down. You've been dishonest about your intentions, dishonest about your motivations, and dishonest about the purpose of this interview. He began to remove the small microphone clipped to his jacket, his movements deliberate and purposeful. The gesture sent a clear message that reverberated through the studio. Samuel, wait, Joy Behar said quickly. Let's just take a step back here. No, Joy. There's no stepping back from this. Jackson's eyes never left Whoopi's face. What happened here today crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. This wasn't television. This wasn't entertainment. This was an ambush designed to humiliate me on national television. Whoopi seemed to realize what was happening. You don't have to leave. We can finish the interview properly. Finish it properly. Jackson stood up, dropping the microphone onto his chair. How do you properly finish an interview that was never conducted in good faith to begin with? How do you properly finish a conversation with someone who came prepared for war? While pretending to offer hospitality, the cameras continued to roll, capturing every moment of what would become one of the most replayed clips in talk show history. Jackson adjusted his jacket with dignity, his composure returning as he prepared to make his exit. I've been in this business for 40 years, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent studio. I've dealt with difficult directors, hostile journalists, and challenging co-stars. But I've never in 4 decades been treated with such blatant disrespect by someone who should have known better. Whoopi's face was flushed red. Whether from anger or embarrassment was impossible to tell. You're being overly dramatic. This is just a conversation between colleagues. Colleagues. Jackson turned back to face her one final time. Colleagues treat each other with respect. Colleagues don't ambush each other on national television. Colleagues don't use their platform to settle personal scores. He took a step toward the edge of the set, then paused. You know what the saddest part of this is, Whoopi? I actually respected you. I respected your work, your activism, your contributions to this industry. I thought we were friends, or at least friendly professionals. We are, Whoopi said desperately. This doesn't have to end like this. It ended the moment you decided to make me the villain in whatever story you've been telling yourself, Jackson replied. The moment you decided that tearing me down would somehow build you up. The other host sat in stunned silence. The audience was completely quiet, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Even the technical crew had stopped their usual behind-the-scenes activity. I hope whatever you are trying to accomplish here was worth it. Jackson continued. I hope destroying our professional relationship and embarrassing yourself on national television was worth satisfying whatever personal grievance you've been nursing. Samuel, please. Whoopi's voice was barely audible now. Please what? Please stay, so you can continue your attack. Please pretend this never happened. Please accept that this is how you treat people you claim to respect. Jackson shook his head. I have too much self-respect for that. He began walking toward the exit, his steps measured and dignified despite the chaos he was leaving behind. Whoopi called after him, her voice rising in desperation. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You can't handle any criticism, any challenge to your perfect image. You're proving my point by walking away. Jackson stopped and turned around one final time. When he spoke, his voice was calm, measured, and absolutely devastating. No, Whoopi. I'm proving that I know the difference between criticism and character assassination. I'm proving that I have enough self-respect not to sit here and be verbally abused for your entertainment or your ego. And I'm proving that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone else's dysfunction. The silence that followed was deafening. Whoopi's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no sound emerged. She had pushed and pushed, expecting Jackson to eventually break down or fight back in a way that would make him look bad. Instead, he had maintained his dignity while exposing her behavior for what it truly was. This interview is over, Jackson announced to the studio and the viewing audience. Not because I can't handle tough questions, but because I won't be a party to this kind of unprofessional behavior. With that, he walked off the set, leaving behind a stunned studio and a host who had just destroyed her own credibility on live television. The cameras continued rolling for several more seconds, capturing Whoopi's shocked expression and the uncomfortable silence that filled the space Jackson had vacated. The remaining hosts looked at each other uncertainly, none of them sure how to recover from what had just transpired. The audience sat in complete silence, processing what they had witnessed. And somewhere in America, millions of viewers were rewinding their recordings, unable to believe what they had just seen unfold in real time. Whoopi had gotten the confrontation she wanted, but not in the way she had planned. Instead of exposing SamuelLJackson as an arrogant has-been, she had revealed herself as someone willing to destroy professional relationships for personal satisfaction. Instead of looking like a fearless journalist asking tough questions, she looked like exactly what Jackson had called her, someone conducting a hit job disguised as an interview. The show went to commercial with Whoopi still sitting in stunned silence, the weight of her actions finally beginning to settle in. But by then it was too late. The damage had been done. The lines had been crossed, and SamuelLJackson had made it clear that some bridges once burned could never be rebuilt. So what do you think? Was SamuelLJackson right to walk off the View set, or should he have stayed and continued the interview? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more stories that reveal what really happens when the cameras are rolling and the gloves come off. Because in Hollywood, sometimes the most revealing moments happen when people think nobody's watching. But in this case, everybody